This is an audio production of Hunter of the Setting Sun by N.N. Shepherd. Music by Josiah Fursanetti. Cover art by Levi Bushnell. Editing by Josiah Fursanetti and Levi Bushnell. Read by the author. Hunter of the Setting Sun. Episode 9. Dixie walked without a stammer or stutter, as straight as a sober woman might walk. Her words were straight and clean, her left hand at her side holding the folds of her dress from dragging in the dirt, her right hand steady on Emmond's arm. Neither of them talked as they walked through the town street, both ignoring the looks of everyone for their own reasons. Finally, she turned them out of the town between two buildings down a thin road between two fenced gardens. A scarecrow waved at them from one side, the wind blowing his only arm back and forth, up and down, turning and turning next to his grinning, false face. "You had a wife?" Her words were soft and caring, and Emmond almost didn't hear them over the wind. It was strange how quickly it had picked up outside the town. "Yes." "She ain't no more, then, assuming Catriona ain't lying?" Emmond paused. That was one way of putting it. "Yes." Her arm held his tighter, and her step quickened a little. They passed the gardens and walked along the narrow path through the grass fields. There were hardly any trees, but a few scrub brushes rose up here and there. The wind whipped about, tossing dust and grass into their faces. "How far is this farm?" "Close enough," she answered. "Have you lived here long?" Emmond asked, deciding on a whim to make conversation with this woman. It was better than silence. She caught his eyes with a laughing look, and then looked back to the path. "I was born back there in the mountains further east, in a little logging camp. My mother worked through the logging and mining camps when she was younger, and got unlucky one time." She laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. "Couldn't keep the apple far from that tree." She smiled back at him. "Didn't try much, to be fair." There was a lot hidden in Dixie's words, Emmond thought, but the pain was clear, and he didn't know where to begin. "What of your father?" he asked. A shrug. "Could have been any number of fellas, if you understand the business." There was a sense of dark humor in her words that hid a profound sadness. Emmond knew the sadness, though not the source. He knew the pain of loss, even of something that you never had. "You have children?" she asked. "Yes." She stopped walking and pulled him to the side, taking his hand in both of hers. "You can answer more than just yes, can't you? I'm not trying to hurt you, mister. Just want to understand." He shook her off, gently, and continued walking. "4 children," he said finally. A tall wooden sign rose into view, and then a high corral fence. "I'm sorry," Dixie said, sounding like she meant it. "I very much would like to return to them. I had no intention of this journey extending as long as it has." "I imagine not." He glanced at her. "Do you have any children of your own?" She smiled sadly and shook her head. "Nearly made one when I was 16, but took in a mighty sickness and lost it. Doc Silas gave me a procedure a year later and removed all the mother parts." She smiled wider, forcing it. "No more scares now." Emmond understood the general idea of what she said, hidden in the foreign drawl and the way she put words together. It was what she was saying without fully telling him, barren and of her own choosing. They passed under the wooden sign painted in big black letters that said Triple Star Ranch. Corrals swooped off to the left and right, and a large ranch house sat at the back of them both, with a tall brown barn next to it and a few other small outbuildings. Horses trotted or stood about in the corrals, and a number of men milled about the grounds. Some of them called to Dixie as they passed, others just whistled high or low, friendly or lustful, Emmond couldn't tell. Possibly both. A young man, or an older boy, his age was hard to determine, wearing a red shirt with the sleeves rolled past his elbows and a wet black cloth tied around his neck, walked up to them and stopped in front of Dixie. He scooped the black hat from his head and ran a finger through the dirty blonde hair that fell about his face. "Miss Dixie, pleasure to have you back at the Triple Star." He was all grinning. His accent was the thickest Emmond had heard so far. "Came for the horse, Coop, on a little errand for Miss Annie." He nodded and donned the hat. "Always ready to help Miss Annie. Sure we are." The young man turned and put a hand to his mouth and gave a high, shrill whistle. "Vic, go and find that old gelding, Danny boy. Quick on your feet now." He turned back to them and grinned again. "Just a moment, Miss Dixie." She tipped her head to him. The young man turned to Emmond, and the look on his face was suddenly much younger than the earlier one. He couldn't have been 20 yet, Emmond decided, perhaps only 15 or 16. "I haven't met you yet, stranger," the boy said, putting out a work-worn hand. Emmond took it and gave a small smile. "Emmond Sarren," he said. "Not a name I've heard before, I'd have to say that much," the boy said. "Cooper Diego, though most call me Coop." "This is your farm?" "This is my ranch." He grinned at the slight correction. The hand he shook with came down and rested on the white handle of the gun at his belt. Emmond found the movement to be quite purposeful. "It's very nice," Emmond admired. Cooper shrugged. "Plenty out there south of us that you ain't seen, but thanks for the kind words regardless." A tall man with bow legs and a gold ring in his right ear walked up to them leading an old brown horse that looked like all it wished to do in the world was go to sleep. "Here he is, Miss Dixie," the man called Vic said with an easy smile. "Was nibbling the apple tree through the fence. Not many apples on there now, but he likes the leaves, it seems." He chuckled a little and handed the lead rope over to Emmond. "Thank you much, both of you," Dixie said warmly. "Anything else you need help with?" the boy Coop asked. His words held a secret weight to them and were almost spoken in another language that was just for Dixie. Emmond understood them, but also knew right at once that so much more was being said. But she shook her head lightly and reached out to pat his arm with her gloved hand. "You're a saint, Coop. Don't let these old pony boys tell you otherwise." She then took a small step forward and leaned up on tiptoes and kissed the boy on the side of his face, a face that maybe hadn't seen a razor yet. She turned and looped her hand through Emmond's and nodded to him. Though Emmond half expected it, none of the other work hands whooped or hollered. There was something about this woman and about their boss that they protected. Two separate things to protect, but both equally as valuable. They reached a minute or two walking away from the ranch before either of them spoke. "He seems quite young to own his own farm, or ranch, as he said." Dixie nodded, a warm look on her face. "Cooper Sr. died in a gunfight 3 years back. Took a bullet to the stomach that killed him steadily for 4 months. Nothing could be done. Coop maybe won't say it outright, but he hates Doc Silas. Can't forgive him." "You're close to the boy?" She looked at Emmond and nodded. "His mother died when he was young. I did what I could to help." "What do you call this world?" Emmond asked on a sudden whim. Dixie gave a short laugh. "Earth? Wyoming? The West? What are you looking for, mister?" "All of it." He laughed a little. "How much did Catriona tell of our origin?" "She said some mighty crazy talk," the woman admitted. "Sounded like King Arthur, knights and castles." "We do have knights and castles," he said, "though no king in the land, not as far as I know. We are ruled by a parley of dukes, who perhaps were once ruled under a king, though the history is beyond me." "History is beyond us all," she said. "Most of the time it's best kept that way." There was a long silence, and neither of them spoke, content to simply walk arm in arm, Emmond leading Danny the old gelding along beside them. The wind still tossed about, but had calmed significantly as they reached the edge of town. "Do you like Shiloh?" Dixie asked. They were walking down the main road. "It reminds me of my town and my world. Across the stars or across the ocean, most things stay the same, it seems." Emmond was about to challenge her on that, asking if she'd ever been anywhere besides Shiloh, but they had reached the hotel again and walked beside it to the back where the small shed was. Dixie lifted a smooth rock from the ground and produced a key that she used to turn the lock on the shed door. Inside was an assortment of the kinds of things Miss Annie had described. Emmond found the saddle and quickly rigged it onto Danny, who stood patiently nibbling the few spare stalks of grass that could be found. "We best go in and let Annie know we have it all," Dixie said. Emmond agreed, and they went back to the kitchen to find the women sitting down on chairs now around the center table, which was filled with plates of bacon and slices of bread, though most of them were empty. Bottles and glasses stood about as well. "All is right as rain," Dixie said, walking past Miss Annie and leaning over to kiss the older woman on the cheek. Annie raised a hand and patted the woman's arm, watching Emmond as she did. "You know where you're going?" Emmond nodded. "You can find your way on your own, then?" "I should be able to." She shrugged, then pointed to Catriona, who looked as though she were asleep with her eyes open. Her head leaned back against the basin sink, and one of those white smokes lay casually between her fingers. "She's had a rough go. I don't think she'll be up for much more gallivanting today, if you catch my meaning." "Yes, I would agree." "We'll have her bundled up in bed for you when you're back with that killer priest." "Thank you," Emmond said, then turned and left. Evening was coming as Emmond rode through the town, west it seemed according to the lower sun, and toward the path that went up into the mountains. They were marvelous mountains, high and gray against the deepening blue of the sky, the green layers where pines rose like the bristles on a brush, pointing to the heavens. Two of the peaks that he could see crested white at the top, snow not releasing the hold on winter that it so longed for all the year. Danny tried protesting right away as the slope up the gravel road became more and more steep, but Emmond clicked on the reins and talked encouragingly to the animal, and they finally made it up to the train tracks. No wind was felt up on the tracks, and Emmond sat for a moment, turning to look down at the valley from the low viewpoint. It was pretty, up there away from any sounds other than nature, and he thought he could enjoy such a place if the circumstances were different. They would have to have been much, much different. He coaxed Danny to walk on, and they moved into the tunnel cut into the side of the rock. It must have taken great workmanship to cut into the rock, Emmond thought, and as they approached the alcove, he reached out and traced his hand along the tunnel wall. The marks were unlike anything he had seen or felt before from any cutting tool that he knew. It was almost as though the rock had been burnt away, though he couldn't really understand how that made any sense. They reached the alcove, and Emmond slipped from the horse and took a breath, trying to focus and prepare to face the man. Walking inside, his eyes adjusted to the deeper darkness, and he found Relvin sitting up against the wall, his legs straight out before him, arms still tied behind his back, the cloth in his mouth wet with saliva. Sweat beaded his forehead, and there was a blush in his cheeks that told of exercise. He'd been trying to do something. Emmond reached over and undid the cloth at his mouth, looking down at his ankles to see that the tie was still there, though it seemed far more loose than when Emmond had tied it at first. "You came back for me." Emmond grabbed his shoulder and turned him over. The belt around his wrists was half open, pried against the rocks behind the man. He had been trying to free himself. Emmond couldn't blame the man, of course. He fixed the belt, pushed the man back in place, and then sat down against the wall opposite him. "Why did you kill my wife?" Relvin smiled, the smile of a saint. "To lie with another man's wife is to bring a curse upon both families. Judgment shall befall those who commit adultery." He said the quote without hesitation. For all Emmond knew, it could have been made up on the spot. "Are you the judge?" He moved his shoulders as though he was trying to spread his arms. "We are all called to judge those who sin against our God. The potter does not craft in vain. His work is perfect. It is trodden who corrupts. We cannot allow him to have hold upon God's world." "And death is the best punishment?" That just smile remained. "Death is the only punishment. She was my wife. I need her." Emmond breathed, feeling the rage creep into him again. A distant thought told him that he should have waited until Catriona could come with him, even if she was drunk. She chose another man, and other men that you did not know of. That's a lie. The smile faded to a smug look of curiosity. Is it a lie? How eager was she to see you when you returned home from a hunting excursion? Did you ever find a sock or a boot print that wasn't yours? Were your friends too friendly with you to the point of suspicion? Even little Aina, the potter bless her soul. I've always thought her eyes to be so pretty. His look turned decidedly cruel and his voice lowered. Her father's eyes, no doubt, but not yours, are they? You're a bastard, Emmond spat. Relvin leaned back against the rock wall and actually looked comfortable. The cool smile was on his face, along with dried blood and a swollen nose, but even that couldn't keep the suave look from him. He seemed like a man who knew exactly who he was and what he believed in, and who knew that nothing in the world, or worlds, could change that. How does it all work? Emmond asked, diverting the conversation away from the lies. So, you want my help? The man asked. I will kill you if you do not help me. So we are at an impasse then, are we not? A deal was struck between you and Catriona, and here we are, somewhere else but far away from Sky City. So I know you are capable of cooperating. Look at this world, Relvin beamed, and the world before. The potter alone knows how many other worlds there are, Emmond, how many places we could travel to and see, how many places we could cure, spreading his teaching in church. So that is your goal? To spread the word of the potter to all worlds, through murder and vile? Through judgment and justice? Relvin's tone was firm. What have you to return to? Your wife is dead, and your children may be as well, if those cowards in the monastery have finally decided what the word of God means. All the weight dropped from Emmond's chest. His brain cleared, evaporating a fog he didn't realize had accumulated there. A burst of light flooded the alcove, and for a moment he thought he was blind. All of his senses seemed hyper-aware, and he had a feeling that, if he so chose, he could float right there where he sat. He looked at Relvin from a distant consciousness. You would kill the children too? Somehow he couldn't say my children. He had to separate himself. They are part of the curse. Did I not make that clear earlier? They are children, complicit in no sin. Surely we do not understand the same God. Is he a God not of order and rule? The clay with which he molded the universe was nothing, and he formed it with the blood of his hand at the turn of his wheel. Who are we to assume anything less than a perfect justice at the twisting of that clay? Are we more than he to break what he has so perfectly designed and believe that our actions should garner no direction? The servant shook his head. His voice had risen to a near fervor pitch, and Emmond realized that he was preaching. It was the first day of the week, and they were gathered in his little church in Dara, clustered among the benches, listening in rapture to the servant of the potter tell of the good words and teach those who could not understand on their own. Who are you, Emmond Sarren, to believe you know better than God? Who are you? Emmond asked back. But an unjustified murderer. Relvin lowered his shoulders, and the fiery look passed, replaced again by the calm, gentle one of a shepherd comforting one of his stray flock. What is your plan, may I ask? Return home to my children and kill you when we arrive, Emmond said, as though he were discussing the weather, and he supposed he was. The death of the man before him had occupied his mind every waking hour since he had seen Eva and knew who had killed her, and every sleeping hour was filled with tormenting memories of her. It was a deadly mix for the guilty. Why should I take you back? Because you must return yourself, Emmond said. He smiled. There was a glint in Relvin's eyes as he said it, and he knew that he had guessed properly. There was something he had been trying to solve. Why stay so long in one place? Why Dara, a small town in the land, the edges of which I have no measure? Our world could be large or small, but I know it is larger than just our little town in the valley. And yet you have been the servant of our valley for as long as I have lived there. Why? You need something there, don't you? Is it your quest to bring the potter to all people, or something else? You assume yourself to be so clever. Emmond laughed bitterly. I find myself hating you, nothing more. Hatred is not allowed under the hand of the potter. Emmond pushed himself up and brushed the dust off his pants. I have found that I care little for what you say is under the potter's hand. I think I will find out his will for myself. He gripped the man under his armpits and lifted him to his feet, his legs twisting back and forth to straighten out, the tie still bound around the ankles. Stooping over, Emmond bumped his shoulders into the man's waist, smiling at the puff of shocked air that escaped Relvin's mouth, and then straightened up, lifting him full on his good shoulder. You're injured, Relvin teased. Emmond's wince of pain as he moved out of the alcove seemed enough of an answer, and Relvin laughed in the dimness of the tunnel. Emmond tossed him onto the front of the saddle, gently if only for the horse's sake, and then took the reins and straightened up fully, feeling the pain in his hip and shoulder. He would need to see the good doctor before too long. Not much more needs to be said, Relvin, Emmond said, walking the horse forward over the train tracks. You attempted to burst me to pieces not but hours ago, the servant said from the side of the horse, the pressure of lying folded over his middle, distorting his voice. I had a change of heart. Did Catriona tell you what it would take to open another fallway? No. So you really don't know how any of this works, do you? A little flashback to the three of them praying over the purple hole came back to him. I assume we have to start praying, Emmond said lightly. You're a fool, Emmond. A fool who doesn't understand much about anything. I understand enough, Emmond said, and led them down the gravel path, through the pines, to the town of Shiloh. Miss Annie had plenty of fine rope in a room in the hotel, and Emmond didn't bother asking why she had so much as they put Relvin in a room and wrapped him tightly in the bonds. They bound him to a chair, tying each leg separately in the hands behind the chair's back, and then tying the chair itself to one of the bedposts. They removed most of Relvin's clothing save his pants, after Rosie had quickly checked that he had no hidden weapons, and then all three of them left the room. The women curtsied at Emmond's thanks and went downstairs, leaving Emmond with the objects found on Relvin's person and the cracked doorway of the room that he and Catriona had been given. He hadn't seen her when he reached the hotel, and hadn't seen her when he led Relvin into the building through the back door and then peeked into the kitchens to see the other three women there, singing some rusty song with filthy lyrics while they washed dishes and cleaned the room. They were all too happy to help him tie up the man who had hurt their poor Catriona. There were a few slaps across Relvin's face that Emmond didn't try to stop. He stood at the cracked door, the silver ball in one hand and the small clasped black book in the other, the only two objects of any worth on Relvin's person. The book had a series of symbols etched into the cover, two of which Emmond recognized. The hand of the potter from his world, and the winged cross from Parker's world. It looked much like the cross that stood atop the steeple of the little white church they had found Relvin in, but the cross on the book cover had 3 arms instead of just the one that stood above the church. "Going to stand there all night?" a voice called shakily from inside the room. Emmond felt stupid for jumping at the voice, but pushed his way inside anyway and smiled at Catriona. She lay in the bed, the quilt up to her chin, the outline of her body visible beneath it all, as though she had climbed under the covers and then somehow tucked them tightly around herself. Surely the other women must have helped her. Her golden hair lay about her head like an aura, a glowing thing of light rather than hair, and her eyes were red above cheeks that glistened with tears. Emmond crossed into the room and sat down on one of the chairs, pulling it over close to the bed. He set the book and the silver sphere down on the short table beside the bed and leaned back in the chair, feeling the full weight of the day creep over him. "Did you kill him?" Emmond could only shake his head no. "You wanted to." He nodded. She nodded back, understanding. "What if he doesn't return us to our home?" "He has to." "Why?" Emmond cleared his throat. "He has something left there, something he needs to go back for." "He told me we had to come here first, before we could go back to our world." "Why?" It was Emmond's turn to ask. Catriona tried shrugging under the blankets, but the motion was lost in the tight coverings. "Not enough fi." Fi. Emmond had heard that word on and off throughout his life. It was a throwaway term for anything that couldn't be explained. A man could jump further than humanly possible? He was holding on to fi. A woman knew her little boy would run into the cattle pen and dashed out of the house just in time to stop him? Fi was speaking to her. Two old friends meet in a town they have never been in before? Fi brought them together again. It was a placeholder word for anything people didn't understand. Like God, but less defined and thus less believed in. Or maybe, Emmond thought, even more believed in than God. What use does Relvin have for Fi? Catriona managed to pull her hands out of the blankets and held them up, turning them slowly in a circle. "The fallway," she explained. "He uses Fi to open the hole into other worlds, back into our world. We prayed, didn't we? Right at the end in the church?" She nodded into the pillow. "Prayer has something to do with it. I don't understand it all, Emmond. I don't think I can. He talked much while we were together, and little did I understand." Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm sorry." She was still in the effects of the drink, he could tell that much. The sober-minded version of this woman wouldn't apologize for something so out of her control. "He's here, across the hall, tied to a chair with a gag in his mouth." Emmond gave a sheepish grin. The women were more than willing to help, and surprisingly more than prepared with materials. A similar grin crept onto Catriona's face. "You know how they make their way, don't you? The girls, not Miss Annie, of course." Emmond nodded. "I believe I have some passing idea of their work." "There were a few establishments in Harbin Point that offered such services to travelers," Catriona said. "It doesn't seem to be their first choice of work, Rosie and Dixie, I mean, but certain generational lines are difficult to sever." Emmond nodded, reminded of what Dixie had told him on their walk to Cooper's Ranch. "I would strive for my own daughter to not be forced into such labor as her only option in life." Tears pooled in Catriona's eyes as she spoke, and Emmond looked away, finding it hard to see her sorrow. She continued even as he watched the world darken outside. "Kara will turn 11 soon. If we don't return quickly, I will miss it. I won't be there for her." Emmond glanced back to the bed to find her watching him, the tears spilling down her cheeks. "Some mother I am, abandoning her children right after the death of their father. Who do they have without me?" Emmond thought for a second, deciding to answer even though he knew it was a rhetorical question. "Your sisters remain, do they not?" She huffed out the breath of air she had pulled in, her whole body seeming to deflate in the bed. "They should not be raised by their aunts. It isn't the same, is it?" "No," Emmond agreed, "but this is important, what we're doing." "Is it?" She looked at him hard, eyes dancing back and forth from one of his to the other, searching deep. "Is there any value in what we have done? Our chase has taken far more turns than I had first thought, and now I don't know that I care so much about seeing justice completed." Emmond opened his mouth to rebut, though nothing came forth, for he realized that he, too, felt that creeping feeling of waste entering his mind. Were he given a choice, he would leave Relvin alive and return to his children. He knew it to be true. Was that the answer that only distance and time allowed? Was that patient virtue that he had never quite mastered coming to the surface at the shores of an island void of his love? "He really believes all that he holds to," Catriona said, breaking his silence. Her eyes were still on his, but a little more distant than they had been just a moment ago. "He did not find pleasure in killing our loves, only in purging the evil as he saw it. He is a righteous man, if only his word is to be held." And you believe all he said? She gave a small shrug, as much as the confining blankets would allow. If Henrik and your Eva are innocent, then what was relevant killing them for? To what end? He didn't tell you? He insisted on his righteousness, but we spoke of much beyond the murder. How much did you learn from him? Too much, she answered. And so, with the sun lowering in the west and the man they had searched for bound in the room next to them, Katriana told her tale. This has been an audio production of Hunter of the Setting Sun by N.N. Shepherd. Music by Josiah Fursanetti. Cover art by Levi Bushnell. Editing by Josiah Fursanetti and Levi Bushnell. Read by the author. Tune in next time for another episode of Hunter of the Setting Sun.